The first time I noticed her, it wasn't because of what she said, it was how she said it. Calm, deliberate, as if every word she spoke had been measured against silence first. She was my literature professor, the kind who carried herself like she belonged in every room she entered. 40, maybe 41. Long black hair, tied neatly, soft strands escaping near her temples. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It drew attention naturally, like gravity. That morning, sunlight spilled through the tall classroom windows, brushing against her white blouse and the thin chain at her neck. She stood by the desk, eyes moving over the room, but paused for half a second when they met mine. It was barely noticeable, a flicker, yet my chest tightened as if she had seen straight through me. She started the lecture on poetry and restraint, the art of what's not said, how emotions could live in the spaces between words. I tried to take notes, but my focus slipped each time she leaned against the desk or adjusted her glasses. There was a confidence in the way she moved, but something gentler beneath it, something unguarded she didn't show often. When class ended, I stayed back, pretending to gather my papers. She asked if I had questions, and I said something about metaphors, anything to hear her voice directed just at me. She smiled, that small, knowing kind of smile that doesn't reach the lips but lives in the eyes. Sometimes, she said, the strongest lines are the ones you never write. Her perfume lingered faintly, a mix of jasmine and something warm, like amber. I noticed the faint laugh lines near her eyes when she looked up from her notes, how they deepened when she laughed softly at my awkwardness. It wasn't flirtation. Not yet. It was awareness, a quiet understanding that something had shifted between us, even if neither of us named it. As I left, I caught my reflection in the glass door, her silhouette behind me, still standing by the desk, arms folded, watching the empty seats. There was distance between us, both literal and invisible, the kind built by age, expectation, and unspoken rules. Yet in that distance, I felt something stir, curiosity, admiration, maybe something deeper I wasn't ready to admit. Later that evening, I replayed the moment in my head. Her voice, the way sunlight framed her, the softness in her tone when she said my name for the first time. It wasn't romantic yet, but it was human, the quiet beginning of a connection neither of us intended, but both felt coming. And though she had reminded us all to address her properly, something in her voice that morning hinted at a boundary she herself was still deciding how to keep. The second time our paths crossed, it wasn't in class. It was late evening when the building was nearly empty. I had stayed behind to print an assignment, the fluorescent lights flickering in the hallway. Her office door was slightly open, a warm golden glow spilling out into the corridor. I hesitated for a second before knocking lightly. "Come in," she said, her voice low, calm, the same voice that could quiet a room full of restless students. She looked different outside of class. Her blazer hung on the back of the chair, sleeves of her blouse rolled up to her elbows. A stack of papers sat in front of her, a cup of tea steaming gently beside them. The sight of her felt oddly domestic, less like a teacher, more like a woman lost in her own quiet world. I handed her my assignment, but she didn't take it immediately. "You're still here?" she asked, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Most students run the moment class ends." "I like the silence," I replied. Her eyes lifted from the papers to meet mine, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The air between us felt still, but not uncomfortable. She leaned back in her chair, studying me, not in the analytical way professors do, but with a kind of patient curiosity. "You're different," she said finally. "You actually listen." I smiled, unsure how to respond. She stood then, crossing the small space between us to place my assignment on the shelf. I caught the faint scent of her perfume again, familiar now, jasmine, clean, warm. She turned slightly, her shoulder brushing mine, just enough to send a quiet shiver through me. "I shouldn't keep you," she said softly, her tone lighter now, almost teasing. "But it's nice having someone who doesn't rush out." Outside, the last of the daylight faded, casting a pale orange tint across her office. It softened everything, her features, her posture, even the lines of the room. I noticed how she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, an absent gesture that felt unguarded, human. We talked for a few minutes about literature, her favorite poets, the kind of silence that holds meaning. Each word added a layer of comfort that shouldn't have been there, not between a student and a teacher, yet it felt natural. When I finally turned to leave, she called out quietly, "You know, in class, it's Miss—" I turned back, smiling, unsure if she was reminding me or testing me. Her lips curved, almost imperceptibly, as she added, "But outside these walls, well, let's not define that just yet." Her eyes held mine for a heartbeat longer than they should have. Not an invitation, not yet, but an acknowledgement. Something unnamed had begun to take root, steady and slow, like the faint echo of a poem neither of us dared to finish reading aloud. Days passed, but something had changed. Every class felt different now. Not because of what she taught, but because of how aware I'd become of her presence. The room seemed to move around her. The scrape of chalk on the board, the turn of her wrist when she wrote, the quiet way she tucked her hair behind her ear before speaking. I told myself it was harmless. Admiration for a brilliant teacher, nothing more. But then there were the glances. Small, fleeting, yet charged. She would call on me to read aloud, her gaze steady, her tone softer than usual. And each time, I could feel something inside me stir, that blend of respect and wonder that teeters dangerously close to desire. One afternoon, she asked me to stay after class. My pulse quickened, though I try not to show it. Everyone else filtered out, laughter echoing faintly down the hall. She gathered her notes, silent for a moment, then looked up. "You seem distracted lately," she said, not accusingly, but with quiet concern. I hesitated, then admitted, "Maybe I've just been thinking too much." She smiled faintly. "Thinking is good, but not when it takes you away from the moment." There was something in her voice, care, maybe, but also a trace of something else. Vulnerability. For the first time, she didn't feel untouchable. She felt real. A woman who had seen enough of life to recognize when someone was crossing an invisible line, yet too human to stop feeling it herself. She stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the edge of the desk beside me. The space between us felt charged, not with intention, but with restraint. "You remind me," she said quietly, "of what it's like to still believe in things deeply." Her words lingered in the air, soft but heavy. I could hear the faint hum of a ceiling fan, the rustle of papers on her desk, every sound amplified by the silence between us. Her eyes flicked toward the window, where afternoon light painted soft gold across her face. It caught in her hair, glinting against the silver earring that swayed gently as she turned back to me. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to come. She must have seen the conflict in my expression, because her tone shifted, warmer now, almost protective. "You'll learn," she said, "that not every feeling needs to be named." Then she picked up her bag, smoothing her blouse as if to seal whatever had just passed between us back into professionalism. "Class dismissed," she added softly, though there was no one left to hear it. As I watched her leave, the faint click of her heels echoing down the hallway, I realized how delicate the balance had become. There was a boundary, invisible yet alive, stretched thin between curiosity and consequence. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which side of it either of us wanted to stay on. It rained the day everything shifted again. Not a heavy downpour, just that steady, quiet kind of rain that makes the world feel slower. The campus paths glistened, trees dripping, the scent of wet earth heavy in the air. Most students rushed for cover, but I stayed behind after her lecture, waiting near the doorway as she gathered her notes. She looked up, amused. "You'll get soaked if you stay here," she said, slipping on her light gray trench coat. Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered. "I don't mind," I replied, holding back a smile. For a second, she just stood there, watching me. Then she sighed, half resigned, half smiling. "You really shouldn't." But she didn't walk away. Instead, she reached in her bag and pulled out a small umbrella, barely enough for one person. "Come on," she said, her voice softer now. "We'll both fit." We stepped outside together, and the rain immediately surrounded us. A soft, rhythmic drumming that made every word feel closer. She held the umbrella slightly tilted toward me, her shoulder brushing against mine as we walked down the narrow path toward the parking lot. Her perfume mingled with the scent of rain, warm and floral. Drops slid off the umbrella's edge, landing on her sleeve. She laughed quietly, the sound low and genuine, and the sight of her, hair damp at the ends, eyes bright under the gray sky, felt almost unreal. "Funny," she said. "I spend all day teaching restraint, and here I'm sharing an umbrella with my student." The words came with a smile, but the pause that followed wasn't playful. It was reflective, like she was testing the weight of what she just said. We stopped under a tree near her car, the rain still falling steadily. I turned to face her, and for a moment, the world felt small, just the two of us beneath the faint sound of rain. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "restraint doesn't mean pretending you don't feel something." Her eyes lifted to mine, steady, searching. "You're too young to talk like that," she whispered, but there wasn't judgment in her voice. There was warmth, maybe a little sadness. A drop of water fell from the umbrella, landing on her hand. Without thinking, I reached to brush it away. My fingers barely grazed her skin, soft, cool from the rain, but the touch lingered, suspended in time. She didn't move immediately, just looked down at my hand, then back at me, her expression unreadable. Then she gently stepped back, clearing her throat. "That's enough rain for today," she said quietly, unlocking her car. But as she turned to go, she added in a voice so faint it was almost lost to the sound of the storm, "You make it very hard to be the sensible one." And for the rest of that day, her words echoed louder than the rain ever could. The following week passed in a blur of half-finished thoughts and stolen glances. Every class felt heavier with the weight of everything unspoken. She avoided holding my gaze for too long, her tone more measured, her smile tighter. But there was a flicker beneath that calm exterior. The more she tried to maintain distance, the more the air between us seemed to pull tight with quiet tension. It was Friday afternoon when I found the note, folded neatly inside the book I'd borrowed from her desk, a copy of Letters to a Young Poet. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, and precise. "If you're free this evening, come by the cafe near the old library. We'll talk about the essay." There was nothing improper about the message, not on paper. But I could feel what lived beneath the words, the careful restraint, the subtle risk. By the time I arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed and glimmering under soft golden light. The cafe was nearly empty, its windows fogged faintly from the warmth inside. She was already there, sitting near the window with a cup of coffee in front of her, wearing a simple navy blouse and a faint smile that told me she hadn't quite decided whether she should have come. "You made it," she said softly when I walked in. Her tone carried both relief and hesitation. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. "Neither was I," she said, eyes meeting mine with quiet honesty. The conversation started safely, literature, life, the usual, but it didn't stay there. It drifted toward everything between the lines. Loneliness, dreams, what it means to feel seen. Her voice softened as she spoke, her hand tracing the rim of her cup slowly. "I used to think growing older meant feeling more certain," she said, eyes lowered. "But sometimes it just means learning to hide doubt better." There was something fragile about her in that moment. Not weak, but human. I found myself watching the way her expression shifted when she talked about things that mattered. Every word felt personal, real. When she looked up again, her gaze held mine with quiet intensity. "You listen in a way that makes it hard to keep things surface level," she said. "That's dangerous. Only if you want it to be," I replied before I could stop myself. Her breath caught, not audibly but visibly. She looked away, smiling faintly as if at her own foolishness. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured. The cafe lights reflected in the window beside her, casting a soft glow over her features. It felt like time had folded. No teacher, no student, just two people sitting too close to honesty. When it was time to leave, she gathered her coat slowly, then looked at me. "Call me miss in class," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Then, after a pause, her lips curved slightly. "But here, maybe just call me by my name." And that was when everything truly began to change. The days after the cafe blurred into something neither of us could quite define. We spoke less in class, fewer glances, fewer pauses, as if silence itself had become a language only we understood. Yet outside the classroom, that silence began to unravel, thread by thread. It was a Thursday evening when she asked for help carrying some materials to her car. The hallway was empty, the kind of quiet that makes even footsteps sound too loud. I followed her to the back entrance, arms full of books, the air cool with the faint scent of chalk and paper. "Thank you," she said as we set the boxes down by her car. Her tone was polite, restrained, but her eyes lingered. She hesitated, as though debating something, then added, "You've been different lately." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "So have you." Her expression softened, but she looked away, shaking her head. "You don't understand." "This," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely between us. "It can't exist." I stepped closer, not enough to break the unspoken rule, but enough that she could feel the sincerity in my voice. "It already does." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she exhaled, quiet and unsteady, as if letting go of something she'd been holding too tightly for too long. "Do you have any idea how complicated this is for me?" she whispered. "I do," I said, "and I don't expect anything. I just don't want to keep pretending I don't feel it." Her eyes lifted, finally meeting mine, no longer guarded, no longer the calm, distant teacher. Just a woman, standing under the soft flicker of a streetlight, rain still glistening on her coat sleeves. "I tried," she said, voice trembling faintly. "I told myself it was just admiration, just a moment. But then you looked at me like I wasn't invisible anymore." There was pain in her words, not guilt, but the ache of finally being seen. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly in the night air. I reached out without thinking, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. She didn't pull away. For the first time, there was no barrier between us, no title, no classroom, no restraint. Just warmth, closeness, breath shared in the small space between us. She looked up, eyes shining under the soft light. "You shouldn't touch me like that," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I know," I whispered, "but you didn't stop me." Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she let out a quiet breath, the kind that sounds like surrender. Then she took a small step back, breaking the moment gently. "We can't keep doing this," she said, but her tone was soft. Not a warning, a confession. As she turned to unlock her car, her hand brushed mine once more, fleeting, tender, deliberate. And though she drove away into the night, I knew something irreversible had just been spoken between us. Not in words, but in touch. The semester's end came faster than either of us expected. The final weeks passed in quiet restraint, the kind that says more than words ever could. Her lectures were as poised as always, her voice calm and even, but every time our eyes met, the air seemed to pause. There was a softness there now, an understanding. Something had been said, even if no one else could hear it. The last class ended on a warm afternoon. The windows were open, sunlight streaming in and catching the dust in the air. When the bell rang, the room filled with the rustle of papers, the scrape of chairs, laughter fading into the hall. She stood by her desk, smiling politely, thanking each student as they left. When I was the last one there, she looked up, the smallest flicker of hesitation before she spoke. "You don't have to stay," she said, but her tone carried no real dismissal. "I wasn't planning to," I replied softly, walking closer. "But I wanted to say goodbye properly." She closed her folder slowly, setting it aside. "Goodbye is simple," she said. "It's what comes after that complicates things." There was a long silence between us. The sunlight fell across her face, and I noticed every small detail I'd memorized over months. The faint smile lines near her eyes, the curve of her lips, the quiet grace in how she stood. She looked both powerful and fragile, like someone who had spent years keeping herself composed. I don't regret any of it, I said finally, even if we never say it out loud. Her breath caught. She looked down, tracing the edge of the desk with her fingertips. You're young, she murmured. You'll move on. You'll find someone your age, someone who doesn't have to hide. I don't want someone else, I said, more softly than I meant to. I just wanted you to know what you meant to me. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her breath. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then brushed against my cheek, light as air, trembling slightly. You make it sound so simple, she whispered. But it isn't. I know, I said. But sometimes the best things aren't. Her eyes softened, filled with something tender and heavy. Then, just for a moment, she let herself fall into the honesty between us, her hands slipping to the back of my neck, her forehead resting gently against mine. No words, no promises, just stillness. Then she pulled back, a quiet smile on her lips. If I see you again, she said, don't call me Mississippi. I smiled, though my chest ached. Then what should I call you? She paused, eyes glimmering under the sunlight. Call me by my name, she said softly, just once. And as I whispered it, the sound of her name seemed to hang in the air, the last lesson she would ever give me, and the one I'd never forget.